So let's have the poll. Let's see where people are doing most of their work. Let's see where this is going to land. Who knows? Yeah, I'm really. Yeah, can you help us out again, E?
At the moment, fully opposed.
Sorry, fully opposed.
Fully opposed is flying at the moment. I don't know.
Okay.
It's still the majority, 60-40. None on unopposed at the moment.
Okay. So it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think, it's music to our ears, I think. I know Pete's initially wrote the level 2 and picked things up after we talked loads about what we would demonstrate on the award and what messages we wanted to put out there. And one was definitely, doing practices through games. So if that message is kind of hit home a little bit, that's it really sits quite comfortable. And just go on, Claire, because I think that's really key. And I know with when I was involved with Scoobs, a lot of the time we would have an element of that of unopposed sort of drill work to get foot patterns and link that into the S&C. So do you want to just explain sort of a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when the Deaf Futsal England, obviously women's team, we're playing national, countries, and we needed to make sure the intensity levels we were able to match demands. So if it was from a European competition, which we then qualified, becoming like really successful third to get to the Worlds, we had to match and get people to mirror some of the high intensity work rate, but actually they needed to develop the physical capacities as well and patterns, as we said. So we designed a circuit that was unopposed because we had to really isolate some of the movement patterns that they needed to do. But what we needed for them to kind of make sure it was at the right level, the right intensity, and hopefully the right decisions. So it was still with the net at the end, for example, and had to hit a target. So even though there was a physical fatigue element, there was a mental fatigue element we were adding in. And it might have been something as simple as, I think at the time they worked for 4 minutes, and how many times could they get around this circuit in the station? And they did that 4 times. And it was okay. So if we got round 3.5, for example, the next time they had to match it, and then if not, get better. And then again, so it was just kind of added into it to kind of make sure it was doing, but really hone in where the coaches would then stand around and help them support that, then actually how they did it. So it wasn't just a rush to get through, but it was the quality of what they needed to do as well, and get them to learn about that.
Yeah. Now, anything you want to chuck in?
Yeah, I think small numbers matched up. Even futsal, it's 5v5, which is small numbers to football people. But even then, 2v2s, 3v3s, and not being scared to just play 2v2 and 3v3 with goals. And I'll come to goals now because it's something I've been talking to coaches about recently. We've had conversations about people saying, we're not ruthless in either D, or we're not ruthless in either box from a football perspective. And then when you start to unpick what training looked like, okay, what did you do in training last night? Oh, well, we started with a possession game. Then we went into line ball. Okay, what did you do the time for? Oh, we did some 1v1s across the court. And then we did some... Okay, so where are the goals? Oh, well, we played a match at the end for 10 minutes or whatever. But actually, can we do a 1v1 practice where it's directional at a goal rather than always across the court? Can we get goals and goalkeepers in as much as possible? So small numbers, 2v2s, 3v3s, goals and goalkeepers. The bit about semi-opposed, George had quite a lot of jokers in his practices on the webinar. He had extra players. So whether you'd call that semi-opposed, where it's not necessarily semi-opposed, but there's an overload, that might be a way to go. And I think that's a good way to implement some of the... We haven't talked too much about systems tonight, but you can almost disguise systems within practices. So the one George used with the 2v2 in the middle and then the 2 wide players, one either side, in disguise, that's kind of a 4-0, which is what they tended to play a lot. But ultimately, it was 2v2 in the middle. You had goals at each end with goalkeepers, and you had players on the outside that they could use if they needed to. Yeah. So, that would be my points. A couple of thoughts there.
I think the thing I picked up off that, when he talked about the wide player. He said if you've got a wide player unopposed off the court, that buys you time. So it gives time for players to move. From a piece of practice design, I thought that was genius, which, you kind of figure out why you've got wide players or players that are sort of safe. But actually, when you think it through about what returns you're getting, it's really clever. It's really
we saw
clever.
some great, you mentioned the Futsal B on Saturday. We saw some great examples of a very similar practice. One was done in the same way with wide players who were deeper to almost have that 4-0 idea and simple constraint of pass and swap places. Well, straight away, if you pass it out wide and you have to swap places, they might do an overlap without even realising, or they might run down the line for a parallel without even realising. We saw the same practice, but then instead of having the wide players deep, they were higher. So straight away, you're into this idea of pivots where you're still trying to find that higher player, and players were cutting across passing lines to allow passes forward. So I think practice design linked to systems, works really well.
No, there's just two last things for me, really. One was about when we're in Barcelona, every age group from the under sevens up to the first team played, the clock was running and the score was running. They played in 3-minute blocks, and the intensity grew towards the end of the 3 minutes as you were chasing a game or seeing it out. The players always knew what the score was, and it was important to win each 3-minute block, even in training. And everything was to a goal, everything directional. I think they're just real key things that dead simple to do, but could get some real intensity out of your work.
Especially when we're saying the big message tonight, movement to receive to face forward. Well, you can only really do that if you're matched up, because if you're not, you don't really have to move and you can face forward. So if you're really going to stretch and challenge players, you probably have got to match up or even go underloaded. I know this is something Pete and I have talked about recently. There's been some research around playing 3v4 and working with a 3. You actually get more use of both feet when you're working with a 3, and they're more creative with trying new things as an underload. So don't be scared to experiment with that, knowing that success might be lower, but you might get some different returns.
Yeah. And the last bit, and I'm intrigued by this, I don't know if people picked up on it, was about George mentioned about the individual work. You know, he's got the best players in Europe and they're all wanting to do, you know, individual work that's going to make them better. You know, so it's not all about team stuff and strategies and systems and all the rest of it. The bit that was going to win then the games was about if individuals could get an extra 1-2% out of themselves. So that might be the right finish at the right time, and those players practicing that every session, time put aside every session to do that. And clearly they've got, you know, numerous coaches and a little bit more time than what probably we might have one session a week with the players. But I think, you know, at that top level, that strive for real excellence, that's probably there's a real lesson in there, I think, somewhere to and the lights are going out on Pete. You're going to have to move. Brilliant. Right. I mean, we've got about a couple of minutes left. Anything else from you, Pete, before we start to wrap up? And I think you might be muted.
Don't make us say it, Pete.
No, I didn't. I couldn't click on my thing about. Now there's some really good stuff in the chat now. It's a lot of it was generated by the opposed versus unopposed. And I think that the general consensus is you've got to look at the players and almost try to match what you give them to what they need. So it's no use going fully opposed if your players need a few stepping stones before it. And I think what really pleases me is a lot of the coaches are commenting about getting to know your players and getting to know what their individual needs might be. That's very encouraging.